Good morning, everybody, or wherever you are in the world. I want to hop on before Dr. Sinead gets here just to give you a little introduction. So I'm Alison Marsh. I am the founder of Pregnancy Pilates IMPACT, and I have been working with Dr. Sinead, or really following her work, for many years now. When I started to study Diastasis Recti and how to best help this special population, I found Dr. Sinead, and she actually has conducted research on the topic, which I know in the Pilates world, we love to see evidence-based information. And I was so excited in, I believe it was 2019, that, 2019, that Dr. Sinead Dufour, who'll be coming on in a few minutes, she conducted a Delphi consensus study called Establishing Expert-Based Recommendations for the Conservative Management of Pregnancy-Related Diastasis Rectus Abdominis. And basically it was getting together over 20 different experts in the field of diastasis recti and deciding on how should professionals that work with this population be helping to manage this issue. And it's really a new topic. There's not a lot of information out there. So I'm really excited to be able to show or share with you from Dr. Sinead's own words the expert-based recommendations for teachers, for Pilates teachers specifically. So one of the things I did many years ago was, you can't hear? Let's see. Tell me if you can hear me. Can you give me a comment in the and let me know if you can hear me or not. Better? So you can hear me. Awesome. Okay, thank you. Okay, so again, we're waiting for Dr. Sinead to come on and talk to us. And I was just saying a little bit about how I found Dr. Sinead and how Dr. Sinead, she conducted a Delphi consensus study where they brought together experts in this field and came up with these recommendations for professionals. And in the PT language, I don't know about you, but when I read research, here's the research right here. When I read research, it's first of all, it's very broad, and the language is very what's the word? Medical. There's a lot of medical language that, as a Pilates teacher, it's hard for me to understand. And just over the several years that I've been reading research and starting to learn the lingo, has it helped me to understand. So basically what I did was I went through this research, combed through it, and created an outline of Pilates teacher language. How can we as Pilates teachers apply this information? So I've been working on that for several years. Dr. Sinead has been generous enough with her time to be able to go through what I've created to say, yes, this makes sense. No, let's change a little bit of this. And so I'm really excited. Is the article linked somewhere? Yeah, okay, so the journal is, so it's establishing expert, so if you just look up establishing expert-based recommendations for the conservative management of pregnancy-related diastasis rectus abdominis, you should be able to find it. Oh, it's the Journal of Women's Health Physical Therapy is where it is. So I'm just waiting to see if Dr. Sinead is going to pop on here. I've only done this a few times. There she is. Hi, Dr. Sinead. Okay. So let's see. Here we go.
Hi,
There you
Alison.
are.
How are
Hi.
you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. I'm excited to chat with you this morning.
Me too, of course, always. I'm so excited to talk to you. So I was just giving everyone a little rundown of how I even came about your work and what we've been able to kind of begin together. And it all started with your research, the establishing expert-based recommendations for the conservative management of pregnancy-related diastasis rectus abdominis, which was a Delphi consensus study, and that was done in 2019.
That's
And
right.
and this actually came out after I had started to learn from you. And basically what I wanted to do with it was make it tangible for Pilates teachers specifically. And so I was saying how you've been so generous with your time to look at what I'm creating and making sure that it makes sense, and that this is something that Pilates teachers actually can use. So before we get into all that, I would love to, I know, but I know a lot of people don't know a little bit more about you, your background, and then the fact that you had twins and you had, I believe you had diastasis as well. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. And I so love what you're doing. I love that you want to bring this to Pilates instructors because there is so much that they can do to help women and individuals with this issue. So I just love it. But yeah, a little bit about me. So I'm an academic clinician. So on the clinical side, I'm a pelvic health physiotherapist. I was sort of a more standard orthopedic physiotherapist for many, many years before I kind of more specialized in pelvic health, perinatal care. But on the academic side, I have a position at McMaster. I'm a professor there. I conduct research. I teach in the School of Medicine and the School of Rehabilitation Science. And outside of that, I sit on a number of different committees and I support a number of different groups, really all with the same vision and mission to, improve care, for individuals through this perinatal care period, right? Really plain and simple. What actually got me interested, though, really in this area and why I transitioned in my clinical practice was my own pregnancy, right? Getting pregnant with twins, birthing them, mothering them, navigating, the whole postpartum space. In that period after that, I had a horrific diastasis and some umbilical hernias to boot. And really that is the thing that really motivated me to learn more about all of this, was to try to help myself. And, where it was very clear around science and data for pelvic organ prolapse and urinary incontinence, the knowledge was so vague, back, I birthed my children in 2010, so about a decade ago now. There really wasn't a lot. And the information that was there, and I searched high and low all around the world, was actually in a lot of conflict with one another. And so, ultimately that set me on a path to then, together with my lead, Stephanie Bernard, to actually come up with those recommendations, because it was so evident that we needed some common ground. And that's kind of how that was all borne out. And fortunately now, our science base around diastasis is getting better. And certainly a lot of the data that we do have is very much sort of corroborating a lot of what those recommendations indicated that were published a couple of years ago. So yeah, definitely some of my own personal lived experience weaved within all of this.
So I would love to know a little bit more about how your experience healing your own diastasis. And you said that you had a hernia, an umbilical hernia.
I had two of them actually. So I'm happy to start there.
Yeah.
So I birthed my babies. I had a cesarean birth. interestingly is now having a cesarean birth is now one of the very key predictive factors that you're going to be more likely to end up with DRA after. But of course we didn't, and there's several reasons why we think that is, so I can talk about that later. But yeah, I really didn't think much of it. I mean, I felt like I healed like fairly easily from my cesarean. I loved being sort of a mother in that early time. At 6 weeks postpartum, I got my clearance to go back to the gym. And really in hindsight, I actually should have known better, but you're so desperate as a new mother to just feel like yourself again and to do what's familiar to you. Right? So what was familiar to me after having a very different life for these first 6 weeks with these two babies and double breastfeeding all around the clock was to get back to my gym, right? And so, I took my clearance and I went back to the gym, and I understandably did the types of things that were familiar to me, right?
Okay.
Well, you line that up now with an abdominal wall that at the bottom has very little mobility and elasticity because of my cesarean. And it's not a surprise that all of the load transference wasn't happening the way it would if I didn't have that strip of tight scar tissue, right? So it's not surprising in hindsight that some of the manual manipulation done to my fascial tissues for that procedure, and then compounding that with these standard movements and exercises I had done no problem when my tissues were in a very different state. I mean, it's not a surprise to me that, I didn't do myself any favors, and that, I ended up, injuring that tissue to the point that I had 2 holes in it, right?
Wow.
And so it was really, as I was moving on and on and on, I was feeling like my abdominal wall was actually getting worse, not better, right? And it wasn't lining up really with the rest of my body. It was kind of that thing. And I started to, at that point, really, because of course I was a physiotherapist already, right? I started to kind of have some insight into, oh my goodness, I think a lot of this I have actually done to myself. And so then I was finally, and I really wasn't, to be honest with you, in a place in my mind to actually kind of really do a clear-cut rehabilitation program, honestly, until my children were closer to 1 year old, because it was just too busy, right? So I was happy to kind of still do my exercises that I was familiar with, but I wasn't even in a mindset to learn a different way of exercising and to start being sort of more mindful of how I was doing my everyday tasks, because things just needed to get done, right? So, finally, when I was at a point, I think it was just ahead of the 1 year point where I thought, okay, I actually need to kind of go to someone. I got to go to like pelvic health PT. I got to get some guidance for this like myself. And I have to take all these courses and learn more about it. And then I was trying to get everything corrected. And really for me, like I was struggling. I would try things. It seemed like it would work. Then it would seem like things would get bad again. And ultimately for me, I needed to have my hernias repaired, right? Like in my case, I had 2 holes now through my linea alba that my whole system was not even responding to attempts to sort of reestablish it, because there was an actual, separation in my tissue, right? Diastasis itself is not a separation, and we'll talk about that. Hernias are. Yeah. And so for me, I ended up needing those holes sewn back up again. And then I was responding nicely to the same types of a routine, which is essentially how your program is set up, right? So that same type of rehab plan, then my body was finally responding to it. So, I mean, at the end of the day, this is kind of what we have to do. We have to kind of always start with a program like yours and basic principles. But then if things aren't sort of getting better, then that's when it can be really helpful for then someone to connect with someone like me to do a more detailed assessment and figure out, okay, well, what is standing in your way that you're not able to respond to these basic principles that we know for the most part should work? And in some cases it is there's a hernia. In some cases it is. You really need to pay much more attention to that scar tissue and get it more malleable. You're never going to get the load transference until you take care of that. For some people, it is unfortunately that the integrity of the linea alba and the associated abdominal wall just really got so strained, probably for a variety of reasons, that at this point they probably do need to be mechanically plicated, and that of course is surgery, not just stitching up the hernias, but actually a plication. So that's kind of where it can be really helpful for a program like yours to work together with, when needed, some consultation with someone who has expertise like me.
Well, I recommend to all of my teachers that they have their pre and postpartum, well, I was going to say postpartum and prenatal clients see a PT, a pelvic floor or pelvic health PT at least once to be able to see so that they can communicate. Because it always makes me feel better to know that someone else is taking a look in ways that I can't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So and I don't think that I knew that you had hernias as well. It's just such a fascinating story, and my understanding is that surgery is really involved. It's not just a simple go in there and stitch. Like, there's a pretty long process of recovery.
Yeah. So what the trouble, to be honest with you, with surgeries like a hernia surgery is that there really lacks a standard. So different surgeons have different skills and want to do different approaches. And, thankfully I knew enough that under no circumstances did I want mesh being used, right? Okay. And you really need to have a surgeon that then has skills that they're able to approximate the tissue in a way, and some of the surrounding tissue in a way that they can just stitch up the holes and they're not bridging it with mesh, right? Okay. So, I have had clients, for example, who, when they've, gotten some different opinions from surgeons, depending on where they live, the surgeons are saying, you have such an extensive, diastasis that we can't just sew up these hernias, that you're going to continue to have them fail because, the anterior abdominal wall is so strained. So you would actually do much better. We stitch up the holes and we also plicate your abdominal wall. Of an abdominoplasty, unfortunately. Okay. But they might make that call to say, well, I would rather have all of the architecture of the tissue corrected properly without a foreign material in my body, which is known to cause problems. Okay. That given that now it's kind of considered a cosmetic procedure, but you're doing it for very clear mechanical and functional reasons. Some women who have hernias might kind of go that route. And then again, they're going to rehab really, really well. And if you have hernias just stitched up, and actually abdominal wall plication, it's actually a fairly good surgery, right? It's much better than doing mesh with hernias.
Okay, so what is plication compared to the mesh?
Yeah, so plication would be even essentially what they do in a tummy tuck. They basically plicate or approximate the linea elbow like this. And some people are doing that really for the reason of just to get a smaller waistline, and they're getting tons of liposuction in addition to that procedure. So it's really not necessarily for functional reasons. But there's many individuals who physiotherapists, our current clinical practice guidelines are after a dedicated year of PT and a really good rehab protocol like the one you've created, Alison. If you are still not getting anywhere and there are clear mechanical deficits, then, you might be better positioned to reach your goals to have, a more mechanical solution, right? Which is, of course, actually plicating the abdominal wall again. So it literally is like knitting the infrastructure of the abdominal wall back together again, really, really strong, right? Okay.
And then over time, I would think that it starts to loosen up in the sense of being functional. How was it for you? What did you notice? How long did it take you after you had that done?
Yeah, and I had a hernia repair. So, you know what? Again, like everyone's a bit different. Like some people will say they've had a cesarean birth and like it was painful and they found it hard to recover. I didn't. Like I was fine within a couple days. And same with this, I was fine. The biggest issue with these surgeries is really like you can't lift, right? So I opted to wait until my children were about 3.5,
Okay.
until I got my hernias repaired. Right? Because I knew that I would have to lift them otherwise. Once they were 3.5, they could crawl up into the back seat themselves and do up their own seatbelt in their things, right? So I waited until that point because I wanted to make sure if I was actually going under and having another surgery, keep in mind, I had already had a cesarean birth. I had already had abdominal surgery, right? So now I'm having another surgery to have these 2 holes in my tummy sewn back up together. And yes, going to someone skilled so I don't need to have mesh, but you better believe I'm not going to risk that surgery and then be lifting after, right? So again, I waited. So, I felt I did okay for that surgery, but for many people after, hernia repair or even an abdominal wall plication, or some people will opt to get them both at the same time to avoid mesh. Yeah, it can be a process, but I would argue that's why people like you and we need to be involved in rehab for those individuals as well, right? So they actually really get a fantastic outcome from, those procedures.
Yeah. So, and I love that, for so long, and I think it's getting a lot better because there are a lot of programs out there now for Pilates teachers. But I think that for a long time, I thought so. We were basically told that we could not work with, like, if somebody had diastasis recti, like you could not work with them, that they had to see a PT. Now, as you're saying, you're even saying like if a Pilates teacher is working with a woman who has this condition and hasn't seen a PT yet, and they're not really making progress, then that's when you can refer to a PT to see what else is going on.
Absolutely. So, technically, if we come back to the guidelines, and I know your program is built around these guidelines, which is one of the reasons what makes it so good. But, of course, a big part of this is, we really want to make sure that we have that deep system working well, right? That's like one of our primary foundations, because if our deep system is working well, then usually we're going to be managing intra-abdominal pressure well. We're going to be optimizing load through the tissue. So we're kind of building it up. We're going to be making sure we're not getting these weird sort of jerks of intra-abdominal pressure that might unnecessarily strain vulnerable tissue in the path of least resistance, right? So we want that working well. Well, we know that the pelvic floor is the leader of the deep system. And so if the pelvic floor is not empowered well, then usually we are not getting, our pressure managed well. We're not getting load transfer as good. And so it can be sometimes difficult for someone who isn't actually doing, either an internal technique or really, really comfortable with kind of external palpation. And I would argue that maybe some Pilates instructors get to the point that they feel competent and comfortable doing some of that. But we need to be sure that the deep system is working well. We want to make sure the floor is working well. So that would be the argument to just be 100% sure that the floor is doing its job. Maybe send the individual even just for one consultation just to make sure that's happening. It's lifting up when it's supposed to. The individual isn't in this habit thinking that, they're using their transversus, but a lot of times when people think they're using their transversus, they're actually using obliques a little bit more. And it's not to say that that's a problem as you go on training, because we want the whole abdominal wall to work well, but we certainly want that deep system to kind of not be overpowered kind of in those early days by sort of like a bracing technique that someone might think is their transversus. So that might be a reason why you would send off to a physio that either does real-time ultrasound, that they can kind of get a really good gauge of what's happening with the pelvic floor and the other muscles, or someone who has internal skills, right? that would be sort of the reason why you would do that. That having been said, that doesn't mean everyone has to start that way, because sometimes people honestly don't need it. They actually, you know, are able to have a good mind-body connection. They kind of are imagining lifting their pelvic floor. They can feel that it's doing what it's kind of supposed to do. They can kind of see that they have sort of a co-contraction of TAs. They get a little bit of very gentle, subtle indrawing. And they can kind of see that they can manage pressure better during tasks when they do that. Okay, so they don't necessarily need to see someone like me. Off they go, following a protocol with really sound principles. Mm-hmm. And then maybe only if they kind of hit a plateau that they couldn't work through with someone like you, then, you know, I wouldn't sort of leave it. I would have them come see someone like me to really help get at, okay, so they were doing great, but now we're at a plateau. Like, what's kind of maybe in the way, or what hasn't been considered? Certainly, we know that if we have kind of restrictions in the upper body, you know, that can influence things. If people are not sleeping well, I mean, that is huge. Women can kind of plateau along, but the further they go from birthing that baby and they're still not sleeping well, the body has less adaptive capacity for that, right? The body has a capacity to kind of deal with that state for a certain amount of time. But, you know, when you're 8-9 months postpartum, your biological systems are now expecting, okay, now we should be getting some really good rest at this point in time. But many women's circumstances aren't that. And so they're going further along and they're expecting that they should be getting it better and better and better, but they haven't filled their battery back up. So it's no surprise, like it's very predictable that their tissues aren't going to train. Their tissues are in a catabolic state at that point, right? But sometimes they just need a little bit of counseling around that to say, at this point in time, we really need to kind of figure out to get you some better rest and recharge, or we're not going to be able to keep building on the fitness side, right? So again, it's usually always a matter of, yes, starting out with really good principled programming, like your program. But then kind of if we're hitting a plateau or something's happening, then trying to figure out, okay, what's standing in the way? And there usually are a few kind of key culprits that stand in the way. And it can make it just simpler to kind of figure it out and to get people going again.
So one of the things you mentioned the last time we spoke was birth trauma, and how sometimes just like if a woman has not actually talked about her birth with anybody really, and it was something that she, you know, wasn't something that she wanted, the way that it went, that sometimes just having like a place for the woman to just talk about it is all someone would need. Now obviously if you see that it really is has been very traumatic and just that one conversation isn't handling it, obviously I always have on hand, you know, being able to refer to a therapist if necessary, like a counselor. Okay. So what have you seen with that in your practice? Do you have any specific memories of clients who just with that, so you have sleep, obviously nutrition, and then obviously the mechanics. What about the emotional?
Yeah, so you're quite right. So I'm really glad you brought this up because it's really important. So what's interesting about the pelvic floor that some people don't understand about the muscle physiology of the pelvic floor. But the pelvic floor is a muscle that is really wired to our threat response system and our autonomic nervous system in a way that's unique compared to other muscles in our body. In fact, actually, the upper traps are the same. The pelvic floor and the upper traps have this unique wiring to the threat response system. So to your point, you know, you've gone through this experience, this birth, you know, how that ended up unfolding kind of imprinted you with, oh my goodness, that was traumatic. Or maybe even in your consciousness, you're not aware of that because everyone's like, oh, your baby's good, like you're good. And, you know, you're kind of almost in shock. But it's like every cell in your body kind of recognized, whoa, and like the threat response is up. Well, automatically the pelvic floor does this, right? The pelvic floor goes into like this locked mode. Well, as you can appreciate, if the pelvic floor is the leader of the whole core system, the whole core system isn't going to function particularly well if the pelvic floor is like this, right? Doesn't matter if you have like the best cue for TVA and, you know, you're trying to tell them about not to dome and whatever, your efforts will be futile because, you know, a big aspect of the foundation, you know, is kind of not really able to participate as it needs to, right? And so what are the different things we can do to send the pelvic floor a signal of safety again so it can kind of let go? Well, there's different ways of getting into the system, but one of the ways that has very good data to kind of back it up, and it's not just specific to getting the pelvic floor in this state, but it's to kind of dial down that kind of response to actually start to kind of address the held trauma, is exactly what you said. It's called a birth debrief, right? So this is like well documented in the literature as an intervention, giving the individual a safe space, like just holding space to say, you know, tell me about it. Totally judgment free, just tell me about it. And the act of creating a safe space to allow that exchange, you know, and validate that, you know, that individual has every right. And actually it's an expectation when we know what physiology does. It's totally expected that this is how an organism would respond to that, right? So it's a form of validation. We see that that can actually be so helpful, and that can be a really nice place to start before you even get the individual breathing. And we know when we get an individual breathing with your diaphragm, that has a connection then with the pelvic floor and the inner unit. We know that if we get some very focused nasal breathing, we can really start to shift into that parasympathetic side of the nervous system. So we can kind of start to bring some of those pieces in. You're quite right. Sometimes after that starting point and kind of giving permission for that individual to start to understand how that experience has affected them, they might then have a realization of, I actually need to unpack this a little bit more. And it's great. Here's XYZ counselor. Here are some other things to do. But certainly a really well evidenced appropriate place to start is the birth debrief. And that can really happen with anyone who feels that they kind of have the skills to be able to handle what might come out of that birth debrief, right? So yeah, so that's a really great point. And absolutely, we need to make sure we're always thinking, well, what are the things that are kind of constraining the system? Well, anything that's continuing to dial the threat response system up is going to dial those muscles up. And so, you know, we need to make sure that we are always starting with a nice blank canvas if we're wanting to get the best results. And if we're not, then, you know, the outcome's not going to be as good. So yeah, so that's a really good point. Thinking of all the things that could put the deep core system not in an optimal place, you're less likely to get the intended benefit of your program as it is set up, Alison.
Right. The other thing that comes to mind is environment, and not not necessarily the environment the mom is in all the time, but coming into the Pilates studio,
right?
And the environment that she is. I mean, I would think, I know when I go into like a new place, especially like a fitness class, you know, like you said, it's like all the alert is up. It's you know, we're so protective of of our feelings and especially in the postpartum period, you know, and I had a conversation with I don't know if you know Tom Waldron. He's a Eric Franklin. He's a Franklin teacher, and anyway, we were talking about body image, and he was saying how, you know, developing a positive body schema is kind of like a better idea than body image. And I was sharing with him just how women, after they have their babies, you know, it's like so many have this deep need to, like you said, hurry up and like you said about your own, you know, birth, hurry up, get back, and I want my body back that I had before this pregnancy. So let's get to it. And he was so honest in his answer. And he basically just said, you know, it's pretty crazy. Like, it's actually really effed up. And he actually said the word. And it is so, and I mean, the only explanation obviously is just societal, you know, pressure. And so coming back to walking into a Pilates studio postpartum, you're not feeling like yourself. Maybe you have these skinny Pilates teachers, you know, that are, or people next to you working out. What can a Pilates teacher do to make sure that their environment is going to be, I guess, settling for clients?
Yeah, so I think this is a really good one because you're quite right. Sometimes we don't even know what we need until it's actually there. And then we think, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I needed, right? Because we're on to like just getting back to how we were before. And really in ways, actually, that is like an established sign of post-traumatic stress. So even if I can reflect on that on my own, as much as I'll say, oh yeah, like my cesarean birth, it was planned and it was, so I knew I was having it. And I felt like I recovered really easily. But what was stressful for me was one of my babies ended up in the NICU and one of them was with me. And so that I think was actually really something I was burying, right? And so each person, I think, can have that about a different aspect of their experience. But that I would argue it is a classic sign usually that something probably needs to be unpacked a little bit. And all of that probably had my pelvic structures way tighter than they needed to be, which probably meant the exercises I were doing were really not particularly constructive, right? If I had have just been able to kind of have that awareness and deal with it. So what would have probably been good for me is walking into, you know, a Pilates studio where, yes, there was other people that I felt like there was a degree of relatability to, right? To make me feel like, you know, I'm not kind of alone in my own experience, like a degree of relatability.
Okay.
But also, you know, that aspect of actually being able to kind of receive care in a way so then you recognize, oh my goodness, this is what I need, right? Okay. So as you said, like we know that things that will like drive up a nervous system is like bright lights and, you know, certain like chemical smells. So yes, like pleasant, natural, nature-based smells that will kind of more trigger your parasympathetic nervous system, right? So the more natural types of even fibers like in the environment, we know that nature has a really positive effect that way, but lights that are not too bright, temperature that it's not like freezing cold when you go in, but it's not roasting hot, like those types of things just to kind of set the tone. But even then sort of an instructor who is able to kind of offer kind of like a little bit of hands-on assistance and kind of an invitation for someone to be able to really receive care, but then also kind of have the understanding when the body language is the individual's just not ready for that yet, you know? Because as I said, sometimes people, they don't even realize that they need to receive that care until they do. And I'll, of course, notice it in my office where as soon as I kind of get my hands on them, it's like, oh my goodness, you know, like they've been caring for everyone else and not even giving themselves the opportunity to just receive, right? And when you can be in a really nourishing yoga Pilates space, right, that can be a great place where you're away from your dependence. You know, you actually have the opportunity to just kind of be, if you're in a pleasant environment that is tweaked towards kind of like taking that, that kind of hypervigilance down.
Yeah.
You know, I think that can be a really helpful place to start because really it all starts with being able to be in your body and listen to it and start kind of like building up those connections. And I know all that's a big part of your program, but those are some of the things that come to mind.
So I have a few comments here I want to point out. So Mindful Miranda, she says, you mentioned what I didn't know I needed. She said, I hear that all the time from my clients, what I didn't know I needed. And Dr. Robin, she says, communication, IMO, announcing things like everyone is at their own point in their health. Drop any thoughts of expectations they're placing on themselves.
Absolutely. Like really cultivating that environment of, we're all here. Our journey doesn't look the same, but we still have a solidarity together and it's judgment free and, you know, which can be a tall order, you know, really and truly. I mean, certainly actually at the womb, which is the practice that I'm a partner and I work out of, it's one of the things I'm actually most proud of that space, because people walk in and sometimes are honestly almost brought to tears, where they say, I like walk in here and I feel like I'm being given like a big hug. Like there's just, so environment can be powerful. And we of course have a lot of those natural elements. You know, we don't have like the bright fluorescent lighting that's in most clinical centers. So all of those things, you know, really all our team is like trained to, you know, communicate in a way that is really loving and like judgment free. And we're here, and come in and sit down and have a cup of tea, even if you don't have an appointment and you just need to get out of your house.
Love
Come
that.
here and you're always welcome. It's that kind of sentiment. Yeah.
So Pilates teachers can learn from that. So that's the womb, right?
That's the womb. Yes.
Room. So can they, what is the
Yes.
URL?
So come to our website. Yeah. www.thewomb.ca. It's an acronym for the world of my baby. It's a perinatal care center, and it's the womb. So yeah, absolutely. Check us out, and you'll even kind of get that type of essence probably even from the website or on Instagram. We're on Instagram too at the world of my baby. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I want to be mindful of your time, and I just want to thank you just for your rich work. And really, I mean, you gave me as a Pilates teacher the go ahead and feeling okay, like, oh, I can help this population. There's a lot, because of exactly what you said, there's a lot that we can do. And out of that has grown what I'm calling the Pilates protocol for diastasis recti, based on your research. It's a workshop that I've redone a few times now, pre-recorded. But what you are going to be offering is on December 15th, same time, 8 a.m. We get to meet via Zoom with all of the students that are in this course. So, so if you're interested in finding more, you can go into my my bio and find the link. But I just want you to know, like, that. Just thank you for, I guess, pulling me along on this mission and being a part of this mission of helping women to feel the best that they can be. And, you know, one of my, obviously, not only we love women, but I look at it like these women are raising our future adults, our future leaders. And mothers can, what they do now with their kids. I don't know if you read a lot. I'm reading a book called What Happened to You. And all they're talking about is as a tiny baby, the things that happen to you as a tiny baby, the kind of love you receive has so much to do with how you handle life in the future. And so I think about that. So anyway, thank you. I let you get on with your day, and just so grateful for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, well, honestly, this is the final thing I'll say before I jump off. And it's what I said to you, I think years ago when we first connected, was I always come across kind of Pilates instructors, yoga instructors who almost are so terrified at stepping out of their scope that they end up underserving the people who, you know, they have an opportunity to actually shift the trajectory of that individual's health for the rest of their life. So, you know, feel empowered. You know, if you ever hit a situation where you think, you know what, yeah, you might now be better off connecting with someone else, you will do that. But there is so much good you can do. You know, people are much more likely going to interface with you rather than someone like me, because there are more of you. So the more you can really feel empowered, you have such an important role, the better. And if that means kind of following along with some of Alison's programs, please do, because we need you. We need you guys out there helping.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the great things about the program is that I don't take it away from you. So you know how some places they'll give you access for like a month or something, like it's up there. It's yours to keep coming back to. If we ever have to make updates, if you ever come up with new research, we'll redo it. So again, and thank you everyone was here and commenting and watching, and just thank you for your dedication as well.
Okay. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay,
Bye.
Bye,
Allison.
Bye.